心的天，三界心都没结果，诸根南道心老者，所以的那个没啥啥呀咪，哦呀的，他就过来说，现在大概是什么？专门就把敲瓦进一步没什么，正在就广播现在全部其他找我是在单面，内容是做个叫我进这一位，叫我你为如今结束军人开有些日别把天气，现在这三九天今年个，吃了老麦把周去没啥吧？哦呀，周去没啥哇钱是吧？安尼，突然我记他们来六七了，我谁个呢？安尼讲跟。突一点吧，那个给俺家他妈死，是吧？突一点吧，那在这开始玩上，俺家我差主要的，然后看出去没留什么，俺注意留什么，龙给留什么，大怎这边留些呢，是吧？看出去没留谁个呢？唐不什么的啦，俺那这种的，期望的，继续个周了说，他把马不有那个啦。아니 콘트치빌레 오시 콘트치빌 어 아니 대제라 아니 가서래 상동 아니 가서래 상 라숨게 나네 띵지지 라와숨 제가나 띵지지 라와 셰럽지 라와 띵지지 라와 추름지 라와 숨 제가나 아니 저부터바데 바 뉴르치니 띵지 라와숨게 나네 아니 상동 라와 되네 아니 가서래 띵지지 라와 아니 룽길 가서래 추름지 라와 제가나 아니 라와숨체 라 디제라 아니 원바 도데 되네 숨기 내게 룽기 담바 숨체 되는 가져 담아 따든지빌로 체니 땅 가져 차치트 가르하고 가르하고 콘드시빌로 숨체데 자좀빌로 치매용길로 주슈길로 세티 데 자좀빌 주카서 저우터에 저유민레 어이 대만보여가 가라 콘드시빌로 체 디제라 주빌로 세가나 아니 셰럽지 라와다 띵지 라와다 셰럽지 라와 아니 저우터바데 데스 마냐냐 주빌로 어라 디제라 룽길로 숨체 네 디제라 따좀 지빌로
가래?
자 저기 집에 따좀 지만 마다 나로기 왜냐면 따좀 지빌로
아니 타마디 다디마
따좀 지만 다 이단 된다 뒤가자 타마시 타마디 따좀 지빌로 말이 是吧我叫我唱就在啦 아니唱啊你懂我讲我这些个看了是吧 你懂我这个啦 수좀 대반도 콘도집에 레우선당 아니 주비 리우 당분이 제외我我唱第我告诉你你懂第告诉 아니 담반 내외 되지 되네 중세 마 두고 와인자 빼나 밀로 자정게 지이나 아니 다 오늘 로그업지 담배까지 야 폐와기 대체 뒤지죠 업주네 만주지로 뭐 대배산에 맞아 뭐 차주행하려 니동업자대 아니 가서래 담반내 뒤체 맞아 뭐 차주님 니동업자 마대니 아니 다른 준비流程 그라 단지 내가라 다 주름지를 내가라 얘기송하라 야
So here, as for where we had left off in the text. No. So here, where we had arrived in the text, it's saying that it is right to make effort at hearing, thinking, and meditating on the explanations and accomplishments of this path, which is pleasing to the scholars, as has been carried on by J. Rinpoche and so forth. And then we went through these points of the fact that this life of leisures and endowments is difficult to find, and that there's no sort of leisure and time in just even this life, and then the fact that the results of karmic actions are not lost. And then it says here, because we've arrived at the last 500 years of the Buddha's teachings. So here, this is actually the way that the teachings are sort of divided up is into 10 sets of 500 years. And so really we're just going over the hump of 200 or 2,500 years and sort of into the decline. So the Buddha's teachings are sort of divided into these various, one could say even like chapters of, during the first period of time after the Buddha's teachings, there are many sort of strong practitioners, so many attaining the goals of an arhat or a stream enterer or once returner and so forth. So during the first sort of chapters of the Buddha's teachings after the Buddha, there were many who were able to obtain those kinds of goals. The teachings sort of increased and flourished, and then it enters into a period where the three trainings, so the trainings in ethical conduct, meditative concentration, and wisdom begin to decline. So although, and they sort of decline in the opposite order. So first there is a decline in the training in special insight and wisdom, and then there begins the decline of the sort of the trainings of meditative concentration, and then begins the decline of the training in ethics. And finally, one gets to a point at the end of the actual 10 periods of 500 years in which all that remains is kind of like a semblance of the teachings, not the actual teachings, but something that sort of resembles them. So here, one could liken this to, say, a person who lives 100 years. During the first half of their life, their first 50 years, they're sort of increasing, growing, and then once they hit the 50-year mark, they're then sort of in decline. We could use like over the hill or something. So here, the teachings then could be looked at in this same way, is that the Buddha's teachings begin to decline, and here we haven't arrived at the final out of these 10 periods of 500 years, but we're in the period of decline of the three trainings, wherein the training in special insight and meditative concentrations have already begun to degenerate, and there's not the same kind of teachings as right after the Buddha, and the same kind of accomplishments being made.
Oh yeah, that did tend to check. Shabba Mama, Rishi Shaw, Shetta. Then you was under just to tend to there, and tend to la. 对吧？各家就各种钱来看钱，看主张。你十天三节了，我说嘛对吧？就做，送走钱呗，作为出钱的他，刚说的三节是最多，是吧？我听了，他谈不三节结束钱就得了，什么的，对吧？各家设备。这意思啊，对吧？个谈不定的，对吧？各家产品，你去对去今年，拉古当限度少，都比年当long节说，产品高我样当，是哦，你去对你推呢，俺这么年纪，俺当把电中个推，我怎么都谁呢？俺当把电中个推，让个看，实际上我怎么都谁话的？俺闲了啥话吃话，你去都去。 现在电把车给切掉，那叫我让你去，电把三家让你去，搞来了，鼓当我他，鼓金把当我他，搞线都少当，人个你来节省都不给年当。 俺那他妈是吧？人家老就去操那么长没把高一把都当心事是吧？你都被撵当， 人个老姐姐穿那长眉个高玉帕多当小娃的，那小娃多的得了小娃瞧，是哇，
So here then, after the comment about the sort of last 500 years of the Buddha's teaching, it says that there's a lot to say, but I'll just leave it at that. And then the next topic is recalling the way in which one remembers the Buddha. And here, this is divided then into three topics. The first of which is giving rise to how one generates respect, recalling the kindness of the Buddha for having undergone different difficult practices in order to become the Buddha, and then the way in which one sort of gives rise to a depression, a sadness at not having actually been able to hear this profound meaning from the Buddha himself, and then finally the way that one gives rise to joy in recalling the way that the Buddha taught this teaching on this profound meaning. And so here, the first of these, so recalling the kindness, how one generates respect or reverence, recalling the kindness of the Buddha, having gone through all of these difficulties in order to obtain Buddhahood. And so here, this comes then in verse 41, where it says, "For its sake," so for the sake of these teachings, "you have given away again and again over countless eons, sometimes your body, at others your life, as well as your loving kin and resources of wealth." So here, as for the meaning of that, so the Buddha, having seen directly the meaning of or emptiness as dependent origination, and then for the purpose of teaching that, explicating or clarifying that to others, he, the Buddha, the victorious one, you gave away on some occasions your own body, on other occasions your life, and sometimes those who were very beloved and dear to you, so like friends and family, mother, father, and so forth. At other times, you gave away all of your collection of possessions for a period of countless eons. Again and again, the Buddha was willing to give away all of these things in order to teach to others what he himself had come to see. So here, if you want to know this in detail, you can look at other sutras as well, at the sutras, in order to learn these stories.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's all that. Remember, Gajetan, who was to ask the chat. That's something was to mother to dinner. Oh, that's our lay. 韩国人的通话以家居娘了起心度，你记住让确定你吃了嘛就搞完先。是点吧的，是吧？看个原来是吧？看着啥呢？俺那咱专门的去突击贵，告诉贵原来的送贵原来，俺那突击原来，差不多俺那什么等中个天阳水那把它，是吧？写了个茶堂，俺那前面就常就个什么说话个缺康阳水两把，俺那头些送这阳水两把了，但呢，俺那三节就恐怕拖把了所谓。原来通话音的，是原来通话音的，原来通话题对不对？俺那家就给人家了到我心头，俺那去年图阿妹都抄的，去年图阿妹都，去年就图阿妹都抄的，缺的，俺那缺了。天着为俺那中间的其实忙不送把的，俺那去了天着为去的，俺讲我那么张我全部个，我说没得吧呢，俺那大高我心里想把出去样就太大声呢，俺那我想把出去样就光体啊，对吧？做的，
No. So here then, the next topic is the way in which one sort of gives rise to a sadness at not having been actually able to hear these teachings on the profound meaning from the Buddha himself. And so here, This comes in verse 42, where it says, then, the intensity of that sorrow does not let go of my mind, just like the mind of a mother constantly goes after her dear child. Sorry, that's not the right verse. It's 42. Seeing the qualities of this teaching pulls hard from your heart, just like what a hook does to a fish. Sad it is not to have heard it from you. So here, this comes in this verse, and it says that, all of the qualities of the Buddha, such as based upon having practiced the Dharma, the Buddha was able to attain enlightenment, and seeing the qualities of that Buddha, so recalling the various qualities of the Buddha's body, the qualities of the Buddha's speech, the qualities of the Buddha's mind, in particular this realization of the profound meaning, as well as the love and compassion and so forth. All of those qualities of the Buddha, due to the force of seeing those qualities, it's like a fish on a hook. This Dharma, which the Buddha taught, and here it says without sort of autonomy, but in a way where he's automatically bringing forth this Dharma in order to benefit others. And so here, Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself is saying that it is very sad that I myself did not have the fortune in order to be able to actually hear these teachings directly from you. So here he's saying that he has sort of like bad fortune, that he was not able to directly hear these teachings from the Buddha himself.
Oh yeah. I didn't cause a chill also mother, but that guy was into Shamba Chuji, Yam to Samne. So, the young shooting, do be pull on my said it one. Jesus on my shaking the dog in a dome, so that Samne, the young said that Gabala, Tata Samne, Gabati Shuki. 是吧？去嘛对吧？这高啊先伢们先把是伢把俺那叫把体修的都比体伢啊修的呢是，俺那都比普拉嘛一节是上往那是嘛一种我们让个普的了，俺那一节是上往其他我提醒都那个一那么更多俺那当我没些是我等着我的当我没些叫我是
So here then, this leads in then to the next verse 43. And so thinking in this way, giving rise to this kind of sorrow or regret at not having been able to hear the teachings actually from the Buddha, Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself reflecting on his great misfortune of not being able to have heard these directly from the Buddha, by the force of that kind of regret or sadness, then it continues into the next verse saying, the intensity of that sorrow does not let go of my mind, just like the mind of a mother constantly goes after her dear child. So here, in that same way that a mother would constantly think of her dear child, her mind would go after them, in just that same way, Je Lama Tsongkhapa says his own mind in all ways never gives up this kind of intensity of longing and sorrow, thinking about having not been able to hear the teachings from the Buddha himself. So just like this example of a mother who's always thinking of her child, Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself is saying how he's always thinking of these teachings and the kindness of the Buddha.
Oh yeah, that didn't. I saw it. I'm saying the issue that didn't. Come down by getting generations. That's something Sanjay was a matter of a Joseph in Banda. Something someday was a matter of a Joseph. I somebody there. Something Sanjay was a matter of a Joseph. Kisum to my Chishi man. Marawati Khaze. The long Chisum Sambana. The long Chisum Sambana, Tempe Baji, Abdoka. Eji Trevor Yongwani, Yamandi, Sani, Dini Dita Sunyado, Ila Tubi Sunyani, Shava Zaman, Tawai, and Nulanda session to man said that day, but it's our 다 되게 가르쳐 봐래서 내가 대달 공도 안에 좀 된대지 안에 가서래 sabje gu chi nyang su lan ba la zhong gui ane san jie yi guang ba to ba chu mi yuan dian tai tang是吧yuan dian kang to ba ta sung ba di la ten da ge di la ane chu sung xie jin ji ten san ba na zhen dian de ji ane sung ba ge xie jin ge ten la san ba na ane sung wa bo zhen dian de rang ge 자 가서는 380 rab도 바신 점대 수마보做了빠지 투라 차야 되나 참담 380 rab도 바신 아니 꾸래여서기 초질 최배가 안에 산재지 신가배 안에 여서기 최배 용수 거로 봐 어디 사회 용수 거에 안에 뒤에면 뭐 산다 배제지 좀 왜냐면 사자 생기티 안 숨을 참배 양지 아니 네 아니 작업 분배지 있다고 아니 코로 아니 참자야나 소와기 아니 찬주자바기 코티달라 수디다고 아니 사무된지 그 딘디다고 소소 냠소 아니 일라 투베기 최선비 소년은 안전지대 야라라 샤와이 야라 전제자만 차와이세 아니 차배도 발라 다세 포만하시 是吧？但是泡泡心头慢慢的，俺盼把就到送下来啊。
你送把的送出准备超一次是吧？你subject的送出准备超一次是吧？
工作全部看上。
这 subject 的。
subject 的是吧？准备的印刷人上午都送把的人的话，准备各地产在了，顺便全备做备出了才对的。
No. Okay. So here, then, the next topic is how one generates joy in thinking about the way that the Buddha gave these teachings. And so this comes in verse 44 and 45. It seems that all the English kind of translate them together. So here it reads, "Here too, as I reflect on your words, I think, blazing with the glory of noble marks and hallowed in a net of light rays, this teacher, in a voice of pristine melody, spoke thus in such a way. The instant such a reflection of the sage's form appears in my mind, it soothes me, just as the moon rays heal fever's pains." So here, the Jelama Tsongkhapa is calling to mind an image of the Buddha giving these teachings. So he says, this thinking about the teachings that you gave like this, for example, like thinking about the meaning of the perfection of wisdom sutras, and the Buddha teaching that at Rajagriha with all blazing completely with the splendor of the marks and the signs, and being completely encircled by a web or a net of light rays filled with Buddha fields in the 10 directions. And so imagining like that scene of the teaching taking place at Rajagriha, or perhaps at one of the places in this world. And here the Buddha then speaks with this voice of Brahma, this pristine melody. Here is another way to translate that. And so thinking about the Buddha teaching here, for example at Rajagriha or in another instance, in the way that thinking about the way that the Buddha must have taught and would have looked and sounded and so forth, when that image of the Buddha arises in his mind, so here it's like a generic image, a mental picture arising in the mind, and when that arises, it is like someone who is afflicted by heat being soothed by cool rays of the moonlight. So here, this image of being sort of tortured by heat and being soothed by these cool rays of moonlight. This is what it's like for him when he imagines the Buddha teaching, calls to mind this image of the Buddha teaching.
Oh yeah, that thing is 디랑 최선 삼바나 세 특히 전대당 단 한동 천만나 러른 천만나 리왕 차고 봉보 시차비 매중 산지 초대 신원시네 사전나 바투도 여자진 신자 유지 근비 추주지 투입바리 군안에 자와 세와다네 전화지바리 송화를 리왕세 칸도 송비네 아니 차고 봉비리我听着话的，俺那买都准备深圳个桥的是啊，啥一桥的，俺那准备呢，我把线呢，天那个了，俺那啥全部，那么出头要再把它，俺那准备的就月季，俺那行人白行人的行家，俺那月季根本给俺那群主那把那说，我就入去接触。我就入去接触，俺那都跟这边送你，俺这点就群主什么样是吧？他就群主什么样？我群主去特别巴结过年，俺那看着来啥呢？看说的鉴定对什么？俺那干别鉴定对什么啦？说话他做鉴定对什么？俺那三节个过年，俺那都在那么了，来不了，俺那看着怎么怎么。
근데 넘버 2도 요 가래데.
사천부 넘버 2도 요 잡아.
So here, this is followed by a quotation from the Special Insight section of the Lamrim Chenmo, where it is describing this teaching at Rajagriha. So here it says this place, which is known as like the mountain of vultures, Vulture Peak. Here at this marvelous place, the supreme place, the Buddha actually went there, and then he like moved the ground in 6 ways. I don't know exactly what this is referring to, but here then he went to Vulture Peak, and it sort of this ground was a special kind of a ground, and here the Buddha was surrounded by various magical emanations filled with hundreds of fields, Buddha fields filled with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so forth, and the splendor of in this sort of splendorous state then gave these teachings. So here this is describing the kind of scenes of the Buddha actually giving the teachings of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras at Rajagriha, and the kind of scene that was. And so this comes to the same point as the verse 44 and 45.
Oh yeah. 那今天，你往新的全部各种结束成就得了，俺你科技先把了一点没用啊，这个旁边也是写说没让我群众，俺你等住马主啊，东北新的全部各种产能啊，把它送没也别难呢，他不他，他说的新的全部各种结束成就啊，科技先把了一点没用处，他电影把它。 科技下边一点没用的，台大麦都穷啊，因庐山的人没改变，对于爬完扎心都那么工作挣把钱，晒在那地嘛的，是吧？那么工作，我台大空的下边个，俺那电球当把电球的，俺那电球当被全都送完了，送完给，俺那台大麦都去没庐山不太行，哇塞！ 那今天的去天天就送个光的，路路也不去，这个干嘛担心？路上不太，科技给我看哇，没看哇，他给，俺那咋爬哇？爬哇是咋爬？真下去没事，但我的程度，那个爬哇，咱心里真把钱说写哇，我说今天的兄弟也不马写哇钱，俺那路。 告诉写把他都得马写把钱，俺那今天的就送把今天的钱呢，俺那从他考马写吧，俺那从他跑考把住的挣把钱吧，让那从他几个月存到也不马写吧，他这里再小规矩的，跑完咱呢，潘军这边这些一百送百是我大大的，你说当是。 电影说当，他本来电影说了，就他妈我说给电影说，没家伙人看上光子去把人有啊是吧？我在他干嘛去吧？ 대이 소속의 교단도 까마제 받아 대이 소속我们做对的我们从的我们去做这干嘛去把给他捐人他说的也对吧？就是主要说干嘛去不对呢？在他们都穷啊，也路上听啊，每个月就有8万在新都是，那么工作挣把钱，现在他呀，对吧？就是
So then here, the next point is how one recalls the kindness of the great charioteers. And here, this is divided into 3 points. The first of these is the way in which the explanations of some Tibetan masters are not reliable. The second is how it is that different sort of traditions of positing things came from India, how it is that you get these different kind of traditions. And then recalling or praising the great charioteers for recalling their kindness, for teaching unmistakably dependent origination. So here, this comes then in verse 46, which says, "This excellent system, most marvelous, some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like the tangled balbaza grass." So here, this explanation, as it's been given above, so here that emptiness is taught as dependent origination and dependent origination is taught as emptiness. This pure sort of marvelous tradition, there were Tibetan masters or Tibetans who were not so scholarly with respect to this, and they managed to sort of tangle everything up like this grass that constantly gets tangled in itself. And so here, this pure tradition was sort of put into confusion by these Tibetan masters who hadn't properly distinguished. They didn't understand well the intent of the Buddha, the way that the teachings were passed down. Rather than realizing the intention correctly, they managed to sort of muddle that. And here, it continues saying that this is like a grass which gets tangled up in itself. This is an example of the way that these earlier Tibetan masters were unable to properly understand and distinguish how to posit the two truths for the individual tenet systems, as we went through before. So understanding how it is that each school posits the two truths and how those are then reinterpreted, or the understanding gets refined as one moves up through the tenet schools, and not being able to distinguish the individual tenet systems, they get this meaning completely confused. Rather than elucidating the intention or the meaning of the Buddha, they were unable to sort of see the various tenet systems and distinguish them properly, and thus have come to confuse the meaning.
아니 장원은 정하고 전부 다 그니 다 되어라兄弟 그 바와 자신도 남바군도 좀 받아 추디 토네 다그이 배바투메 캐와이 제수단의 최진이 엄마양당양도 자 사티 말에 어 표지写出来 一旦没被触的 아니 장군아마 정화 전부 기타기 아니 배바 투미 관에 가서 이대매 받을 시네 아니 장군아마 정화 전부 다기 배바 투미 관에 아니 다 자가숑 자가캐외숑 자가캐와 아니 루르다 아얀데 와다 통매다 인연다 초지랑보다 최지차보다我下家有当 아니 다 근데 전에 怎么这个去建筑创意些这个我听到给你建长给熊给结束章呢熊这档听到给建筑创意给结束这边你家个看我听到给熊给结束章呢你怎么给 공부 중대다기 아니고 또 뭐 취지 공부 삼모 양다양도 자와 채소 야
So then continuing this, it says that coming to recognize and see that the explanation, the way that the earlier Tibetans explained this is not reliable. So here, Je-Lama Tsongkhapa recognizes or sees that the way that these things have been presented by the earlier Tibetan masters was not a reliable kind of a presentation. Having seen that, he then searches out the proper meaning for himself. So here this comes in verse 47. Where he says, seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. So seeing this situation that certain Tibetans' interpretations were not reliable, he then looks back at those made multiple efforts to look at the texts of the Indian masters. So here it specifically references the 6 ornaments and the 2 supreme ones. So the 6 ornaments are Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Vasubandhu, Asanga, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti, and then the 2 supreme ones being Shakyaprabha and Gunaprabha. So he looked at the texts as they were explicated by these reliable Indian masters and searched again and again for this profound intention of you, the Buddha. So here he is saying that he has, Je-Lama Tsongkhapa himself has made a great deal of effort at finding the real intention of the Buddha, not looking at these unreliable sort of explanations, but rather looking back to those Indian masters who properly understood the intention of the Buddha, and following after that, he sought out the profound intention of the Buddha.
Oh yeah. 추지선은 다근에 배바투마 커와 제주로는 추진이 공부한다 양도 자세 진짜와 제가 다 대제라 대제랑 先대화이 수만달라 장반나 나 치치체좀 자와이 다그윤이 군두동 소할테 말이 자 대세 내다 랑게 대화 아니 그런 게 대화 아니 강 춥다 고마 우마와다 아니 현지 대화 치료常见다 나 좋아하기 아니 흉당 뭐뭐뭐 와서나 담做的年的的人不出名我不嘛印象或者我不嘛话是个的是吧现在那个全能人不出名我嘛印象我们嘛话是的我听着有点多的话的车上跑了说我嘛运的话太大个你凶嘛不了讲吧那是아니 다 주다 소소기 아니 로베 남지 로베 마 캐와 대다기 아니 세주 민자 세주 대다 파수 만져와 是吧？看我台大个协助免责性，免责性，我免责性免责我马这吧。我你看了再说，怕有边境日吧，怕有边境的日吧，10斤另嘛，啊，10斤另外啥话的，俺那包的多高不一把的，别另外一边，台大嘞。康熙出外面把赢是，我们在这个下巴呢，康熙出外面把这，康熙出外的叫我赢伢们都，俺那其实特种个台湾，俺那大概有更多东王是吧？我他把这俺那东少算一般的，一东啊，一招啊。
So here then the next, so we just went through verse 47 where he says, seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. And then it continues into the next verse saying, at such times as I studied the numerous works of both Buddhist and non-Buddhist schools, my mind became tormented evermore, constantly by a network of doubts. So here he says then he began to look to study the various works of the Buddhist tenet holders. So from the Madhyamikas, the middle way practitioners, all the way through the lower tenet schools, as well as those non-Buddhist systems, including like the Samkhyas or the Kyangpenpas, as well as looking at the texts of those who we call realists, maybe in English. They propound that things truly exist. So this would include the Buddhist tenet holders of the Great Exposition School as well as the Sutra School, who propound that there are really truly existent objects. So Je Lama Tsongkhapa put himself to study of those Buddhist tenet systems as well as those outside systems, and studying the different ways that they explain things, as well as understanding it in a non-mixed way. So he's approaching them each on their own terms, not mixing them or mixing their ways of explanation together. And this he sought out the explanations as they were given by the great pundits of India, who used sort of profound and stable reasoning, and based upon those, he tried to figure out what was mistaken about those views and what was unmistaken or unerring. And at that time, as he was going through this kind of investigation, his mind was stricken with a net of doubt. So it says, "My mind became tormented evermore, constantly by a net of doubt." So as he was investigating these various systems, his mind became sort of overcome by a sense of torment at not being able to determine properly the meaning of these various things.
Oh yeah. 他这里存在是雄鹿来怕江北，俺那汤嘛，在闽南啦，俺那特种结哇，前面这边个些嘛也吧。俺那就是说个单把男性的，俺那团了那上马的个，俺那里边叫特种结哇，特种结，看俺那看说看这几天天也不特种来讲就记录说俺那些呢，俺那特种结呢，俺那特意接受，俺那特种了就别。 아니 다 때마 참아 때마 탐자 가면서 또 봐. 점점대 지추 기바숨 숨바도 추주 친에서 숨바 탐자 아니 가면도 또네 점점대 지 숨라 탐자 가사지 창자비 아니 가사 담아도 찾주서 샤바차와 마야 이근용의 조가에 리시샤고 야.
So here, then it continues saying that as he, by learning the various systems of the four tenet schools, first one generates doubt with respect to the various essential points of the teaching. So it is by first having a sort of doubt about these that one then enters in to the investigation of the teachings. By initially having some kind of an idea of doubt, one then proceeds to gain a kind of stable ascertainment. But before one has gained any kind of certainty or ascertainment of the essential points of the teaching, first one needs to generate doubt, and that's actually the way that one enters in to beginning the teaching. So there are multiple quotations that talk about this, how doubt is actually how one begins the process of training one's mind in the various traditions of the tenets and so forth. And then finally one is able to see, having realized that all of the teachings are non-contradictory, there's no contradictions between them, then all the instructions arise, or all of the teachings arise as personal instructions. So these are the sort of things that one needs to come to an understanding of. And here it's sort of difficult for him to lay out with just a few words, so he doesn't go into too much detail. But the things that he has listed are the way in which one gives rise to doubt, and then how one comes to see all of the teachings as personal instructions, having realized that the teachings of the Buddha don't have any contradictions. This is sort of represents the progression of understanding the teachings.
Oh yeah, that's it. You are true. Me, but she doesn't be getting China. And then I was job at that. 최질라메 TV소 여담메베 타바는 지시제 저와 롱대마 누르숑루 군대 차 세트디 군대 차 아니 제메 챔비 중국제 소르다 아단데바도 숑루 군대 차 세 이게 다 가려서 말해서 신다 전부 누르 그까지 채내서로 누르단 다와 잡아라서 최질라메 TV소 라나 메바기 티바 디 아니 가서래 여담메베 타바마 자르가 아니 다자가 타니다 잡아 그러 라신지 여버기 여다당 때는 메바기 메다니 차데 라신지 매장 타냐잠도 아니 올레 랑도 그나샤 타바기 그러 어딘지 최질라메 TV소 여담메베 타바네 지신 제와 논담바 세가 다 예매가 탑 점된 대지 라나메비 TV소 예매지 탄한네비 언니다 사모 동바된 중고 태양 사모 동변天有的 아니 점된 대지 공바 제와 논담인데 논담바 세대 아니 루루 공부 루루 점된 대랑 그 루담바 논담바 이상 중국에서래 대라 깜바니 대라 라미시소 출판 깜바니 중 대라 측간 담보니라 니양 니세 랑가시빌로라 루루논데베 측이대와 모세가 다 측간 담보니 최질라메 TV소 여담메베 탑베바 지신제와 논담바 세대 아니 다 루루논데베 중 너들 랑가시바 너들 달랑가시베 내가서 많이 양한 대도나 너저 비디 유되니 대롱반된 시샤와 아니 김이 미천로 루션 베바디 루루시 베바디 여담메비 탑반에서 오다사모 동바된 중그 전단라 반에 여다당 메다당 차위 아니 여담메비 탑반에서 아니 가서래 여담에 버타지 지신제 그 부디 말에 여담에 버타반에서 로도 베지거든요. 그런 번에서 좀 예전에 버타대 봐. 어디 아니 라도 가위 사접때 대화전도 태주었어. 아니 고랑기 어떻게바치면 남냠솔라네 사접도 가와 톱대 아니 대화전도 줘야 대화전도 배 위제와시 오 도시체니 논담바 도질랑가샤바 그 도대 그 텐디와리 야
So, here then, the next point is recalling or praising the great charioteers, recalling their kindness for being able to understand this unmistakably. So here, this comes in the next verse, 49, where Jelama Tsongkhapa praises, in the following verse as well, where he praises these great charioteers such as Nagarjuna and later on Chandrakirti, who properly explicated the intention of the Buddha. And so here the verse 49 begins with the night lily grove of Nagarjuna's treatises. Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, would unravel your excellent vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence. So the Buddha himself prophesied Nagarjuna in a number of places, including the Descent from Lanka Sutra, and Nagarjuna, who would be able to abide free from any of the extremes. So here he would come to understand correctly how there could be no intrinsic existence and still posit conventional existence. So Nagarjuna finds this way between the extremes of some kind of intrinsic existence or utter non-existence. So Nagarjuna was prophesied that he would find this middle way, or he would properly explicate the middle way, which was free from any kind of extremes. And so there are a number of different sort of prophecies that the Buddha made, but here, the verse in the Tibetan begins with shunning. So it begins with the your unexcelled vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence. And so the first topic is going to come in those first two lines, and then in the second two lines comes the sort of it gets at the prophecy that was made about Nagarjuna. So there are a number of different verses which quote this, but the Descent from Lanka Sutra says, a glorious and renowned monk shall appear in the southern land of Vidali, known by the name of Naga. He will destroy the views on being and non-being. There are other slightly different verses that talk about Nagarjuna, but basically the Buddha prophesies that this monk would appear who would properly show the middle way, which was free from any kind of extremes. So he prophesies that Nagarjuna would come and that he would obtain the grounds. He would be a bodhisattva. He would come in the guise of a bodhisattva who had obtained at least the first ground. There's some dispute about the level of realizations. But here, this is the second two lines, which are the first two lines in the English, are getting at this prophecy of Nagarjuna coming into the world and being able to properly explain the middle way free from extremes.
Oh yeah, 되게 대체, right? 근데 다 저는 여담에 비해서 지신 들어봐 논데 봐. 특히 시와의 루루숑루 근데 차사지 루루숑루 되다. 어느 꿈부터에 차서고 차지 수수가 받이 배치해. 되네. 루루숑루는 팀에 캠비经过제 수럽 칼라 토메주 탄진인기 멤버세 라만주가 수년 바반된데 레셔지 여가 청와 사제바 세대 다디 말이라 지가시오데 대대는 루루숑루는 팀에 캠비经过제 수럽 칼라 토메주 탄진인기 멤버세 세대 받잖아 이 가르를 해서나 시간 시와 되고前面前辈经过这是吃嘛嘛不给，俺呢告诉的前辈经过沙瓦山家接话前辈给，俺呢经过大瓦给经过杨树接话的他，是吧？俺呢前辈是苏上给看了。좀 된대지 아니 수락게 칼라 토면 다와 나가라 주바대랑 아니 좀 된대지 그 수락게 칼라 주바 다와 잡아대 수락 칼라 주바대 베전자 수락 칼라 쏘면서 탄진인 그 멤버세 세간한다에 나가기 멤버세와 나신 전에 아니 다와 잡아기 레셔지 아니 탄진지 다와 세와 잡아 탄진인 그 멤버세 로마 유가 신년바 다음에 그 감이 소탐제 세진년바 전에 세진년바 대신도 아니 나와 뭐 레셔지 아니 가서 단진인데 와면 만난데 레셔지 딱그 가서래 현도 마와 대다 수신도 마인바我대다 만난데 왜 레셔지 여가 청와상 차체바 세대와 단진인게 명바세 로바를 마와 치지로도 마와 아니 주가당 치지는 바 만난데 왜 레셔지 치지로도 치지로도 마와 대다 아니 수신은 바 대외 여기 감미소 수신은 바 전에 다 드신 바 만난데 왜 레셔지 여가 청와사죠 아니 라미 친지 통화서 다 딜레오나 오야.
So here then in this verse 49, it gives this example to illustrate what Nagarjuna's teachings are like. The tradition of Nagarjuna's treatises is explained to be like a night lily grove. So this is the example that is laid out in that verse. And then it deals with the four lines that talk about Chandrakirti and the four ways in which he is sort of like a moon here. And so this is laid out in the next verse 50, where it says, and actually in the English I'm reading, the 50 and 51 have taken some different ways. So it says, illuminated by the garland of white lights, of Chandra's well-uttered insight, Chandra, whose stainless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across scripture's space. So here, it in the Tibetan begins with this line, whose stainless wisdom orb is full. One could say this like Chandrakirti has this stainless wisdom which has been sort of expanded fully, such that he has perfect knowledge of the profound and the vast. There's no sort of stain or taint to his knowledge, and he, it says, sort of glides effortlessly or is able to traverse without any sort of hindrance through all of the teachings, through the space of all of the teachings. And his teachings actually dispel any sort of the darkness of extremist hearts. Sorry, this is going into verse 51 in this English translation. But so Chandrakirti is able to eliminate any of the darkness held by those, or of those who are holding to kind of extremist views, by his wisdom being like this moonlight that is illuminating. He is able to dispel the darkness of those who hold to extreme kind of views. And he's also, he outshines the constellations of false speakers. So here again, this continues into 51, where it is describing the way in which Chandrakirti is able to outshine, or sort of, outshine anyone who speaks against him, these false kind of orators. And here it continues saying that, So, yeah, that's where we're at. Sikje dini tes no
Sikje tanda di tara karo choji la me tibi so yada me be tabana chishi jawa londenba che lu shung lu kundi sa sha ta chime chimbi jinggo je sura kala tome ju nangala ju ba tanzin yingi memba se to loma ju ka sinen ba 다 반대한다위 레시아지 여가 청아 사체바 야다 그래서 디서야 주저
길사서
되셨다 라미지지 토면이 다그이는 아서도 다 디란데스도 걸어오자 딜리레시니 볼래 레시니 타대요래 라 잠린 케베 견주 디남지 레시군라 이네 크메장스 잠린 케와 아니 견주 쳐라라 쇼비숑님 케베 견주 주와 디남지 레시군라 이네 크메자스와 그왜 가르사나 콘데 땡주 밀리 땡지지 코와당 양대라 소로 콘데지 쳐남 아니 땡주 밀리 땡지라 땡네 아니 탄진기 메데 탄진데 라시디 주바집에 좀 봐라 탄진 어 되게 메데데 티 현유 가서 저기 가서 남조관라 저기 와 탄진 메데 탐제 지켜봐 된다비 아니 가서래 나와려면 레시아여가지 텐라웨지 집이 수대 아니 자식 그 공부 시다 와신도 아니 자식 자와策사다 엄마 집에 가서 레시아 아니 나와 잡아 잡아 인장 아니 나와 잡아 제수네 다 치럽게 로마는 잡아한다 나와려면 레시아여가지 로미 근데 살아 치비시세 아니 나와 그 여기 아니 군대사 쳐와나시 로 쳐와네 치비세스 아니 산제 장지 땜비 남토나 루루루산 조 미시소 수수이가나 아니 좀 가서래 장군님아 정하고 치비 삼모따위 주 나와 충비 추시해야 돼 아니 산제 장지 가서 산재 장기 아니 람탄 바세 가서 단这有啊也是路主也是做工啊也是路主也是做工啊是一个了路主当大话差不多泡泡拉当三节讲的是吧按习惯来做云机的他把这也是路主也是做工啊什么电用他们就找我在按你什么电用给当把电用给大家安排做连在吧第呢晚点三节讲给按你这必须按你就讲过了嘛中国我去被吐了按你下巴给没得出呢是吧没得出呢按你三年的按你三节讲给在不着不对的把你10年按你什么电用给什么当把你出去不给他出现过的我得送过的他是吧我三节讲给代表那么多呢路上做我没做些就把它拿去了Ja.
Nu som så midjin su midjingir. Tamadi ludu
Tama kare ludu nusan zo midjin su ludu 그 누산 뭐지 midjin 거 수요를 조금 말해 준 거다. ludu 그 누산 zo midjin su 여기
No. So here, then these two verses that are dealing with then Chandrakirti and how Jelama Tsongkhapa was able to give rise to this understanding. I'll just read these two verses again. Well, it's actually 6 lines. So, illuminated by the garland of white lights of Chandra's well-uttered insights, Chandra, whose stainless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across Scripture's space, who dispels the darkness of extremist hearts, and who outshines the constellations of false speakers. So here, then, this is similar to a quotation coming from Lekshe Nyingbo, where Je Lama Tsongkhapa is actually describing the way in which he gives rise to an understanding of the profound view. And so he's talking about although one could have sort of respect or reverence for all of these good various explanations of these ornaments of the scholars of the world, he gives rise to a special kind of reverence or respect for those who are able to, through this logical proof, this undeceptive logical proof of dependent origination, so that all phenomena within samsara and nirvana are dependently originated, and this is proven by this logical proof of dependent origination. This destroys all objects grasped at in an extreme way. So one destroys any sort of object of the grasping at true existence or grasping at things as though they had some kind of intrinsic existence. And this was so from the well-uttered insights of Chandrakirti. So this white light of Chandrakirti is being used to illuminate the sort of lily grove of the teachings of Nagarjuna. So this is like opening that up. And so having seen then the path taught by Buddhapalita, he recognizes that no one properly grasps this system of Nagarjuna in the proper kind of a way. So here, this is describing the way in which Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself was able to give rise to the profound view. So there was a point at which he was engaged in his studies and had not yet sort of arrived at the proper view. And one night, Je Lama Tsongkhapa had a dream in which various Indian masters were sort of engaged in a discussion. So you had like Nagarjuna and Aryadeva and Buddhapalita, Chandrakirti, and so forth. And and he's witnessing them having this kind of discussion. And at one point, Buddhapalita gets up and he touches a text to Je Lama Tsongkhapa's head. And the next day, then Je Lama Tsongkhapa got up and he began studying again in the commentary Buddhapalita by Buddhapalita. And it was at that point that he was then able to come to a realization of the proper intention of the Buddha. So he looked again at this text of Buddhapalita and was able to realize the meaning, have an understanding of the meaning. So that episode, which is related here at the end of Lekshe Ningpo, is similar to the meaning that is conveyed here in verse 49 through 51 of the way in which Je Lama Tsongkhapa came to see these masters as presenting the proper view.
Oh yeah, that is 시간 치마니오 티 산재장지 땜벨라서 루루루산 조금 미성소 세가나 아니 산재장 통마 아니 최점제 라시지 매발라 아니 자제 탐제 태바그 소청개인데 통마다 루루그 슈라 루루 가서 라시지 매라장 아니 자제 탐제 시바 소청개인데 新的给拿新建立，他新的所见的装模就从他们前面话，看见情感的担保的，啥的全部没对的话，但你录入单当然你看到没有吧？那你，啊你讲过了嘛？正好就3月那么这样下巴给，再下巴再来，啊你嘛写过那个人提前那个人是吧？那么来写话查询是，现在全部写，那么就各种参保样提前你的也是，你的那些人不当。 아니 라빈 되대당 냠시 남니 또바 툴라 추제데 라린 되대체 담바니야 차니베 가서 로죠 난다데 슝라 아니 장바 난다데 아니 도체 뒤래마 자가 개와 ben루고 슝된저라 아니 태와다 삼바 난도데 도체 뒤래마 세 니요바레 어디이라 바시고 그래 야
So then here, this is the verses that were given from Lekshe Ningpo here is also showing this verse about Buddhapalita is also showing the way in which he was the one who opened the chariot path of the Prasangikas. So although Nagarjuna taught that all things lack inherent existence, Buddhapalita was the first to rely upon consequences, upon using consequences in order to prove a particular point. And so that in that way, Buddhapalita is considered to be the sort of opener of the path of the Prasangikas. Although we talked about this earlier with Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita and their various contributions, but here we'll just leave it at that. And then here, although he only says these two names of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, we can know that he's getting at all of the important sort of Indian masters, and we could know this from Je Lama Tsongkhapa's secret biography. So here, this can also sort of represent recalling the kindness of the other great charioteers besides Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. And if one wants to know more about the various, the way in which Je Lama Tsongkhapa went from hearing the teachings to thinking through them to meditating and giving rise to realizations and so forth, one can look at various different texts, such as the secret autobiography, the short Lam Rim, the sort of fulfillment of all aims, this Tokche Duma, and as well as the essence of good explanations and so forth. In these texts, there are portions that deal with how Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself was giving rise to these understandings and realizations and so forth.
Oh yeah, that summa gewe shinye라 그와 제조데 다 된다 공도 샤바게 전에 아니 남이 kinji 통매제 다게 있는 가서 통세 하나다 루루 그 가서 공부 치다 와신도 다와 잡아게 짜와게 아니 동바 된중 그 텐데 아니 장고라마 정가와 첨보라다 더고더 고란 템보여야 라미 치지 토베다 그냥 와서 좀 제제 대다도나 콘도 샤바다 텐시싱스라 마도나 동바 된중 그 텐도 도나 콘도 샤바다 텐시싱 마도나 거볼라 미주비 저바 지비 아니 람보 체데 페지 커 파모치 제유도 마주와 마세 아니 다 랑제 랑데 아니 춥다마마 시나네 랑지베 많이 매 내테니 추와메비 아니 신다 제부 누루 옆세지 치다와 신도 짜와나 신 전에 아니 장고라마 정가와 제부 아니 지지 잼배양다 아니 라마 우마와 보도 제거든기 아니 통위세 아니 다기니 나시 대와 톱치와오
So finally, there's another point here. The third point, I'm not sure exactly what, but here it's the way in which one gives rise to respect for the virtuous spiritual friend. And so this arrives in the last two lines of verse 51, when it says, "When, through my teacher's kindness, I saw this, my mind found a rest at last." And so here, this is speaking of the way in which, through having the Buddha's intention, understanding that the Buddha taught emptiness as dependent origination and dependent origination as emptiness, and then this intention was explicated by Nagarjuna and illuminated by Chandrakirti and so forth, and then Jelama Tsongkhapa, through the kindness of his own lamas, came to understand this meaning. So here, if one is able to properly understand, as was explained above, then this is something that is greatly meaningful. But if one doesn't understand that properly, then there's no way to be freed from samsara. And so many of the earlier Tibetan masters, for the most part, they didn't even this sort of profound meaning was not something that was part of their sphere of activity, and not only that, but for the autonomists and below, they aren't even able to find the proper sort of basis upon which to then come to the proper understanding. And so here it says, as for Jelama Tsongkhapa, he was able to come to an understanding of the way that this intention was laid out, this unmistaken sort of presentation of the Buddha's intention as it was laid out by the great charioteer, Nagarjuna, and his sons and so forth, through the kindness of his own Lama, Manjushri, as well the sort of divine Lama, the Yidam, Manjushri, as well as through his own person, teacher who was a person, Umapa Dorje, Pao Dorje. So here, the actual human person who aided him in communicating with Manjushri. And so when, due to the kindness of those teachers, he was then able to see this intention, his mind obtained the sort of happiness of rest, of peace, at having found the intention of the Buddha.
Oh yeah, and it told me, and the jungle of Matonga was Chambola, Jijin Jambayang, Chua Shidi Gana, and the Lama Uma was Judy, Chua Mado, Muzunduma, Patakashi, then they know me. And in Jela, and the Jijin Jambayang, Muzum the Jani, and it Lama Uma was by Jumogo. 아니 잠배양 유출한 것음도 니리신도 레세 뒤뒤지 두심계의 천지 찍되어 규미 쳐버dom나 소한데 전에 그를 못 채고 떠발을 원하시 전에 잠배양 유출한 것으로 니만 니리신도 레세 뒤뒤지 아니 규미 쳐버dom바 어제라 되는 말에 잠배양 유출한 것음도 니리신도 레세 뒤뒤지 두숨 예외 천지 찍되어 기대수미 자와 탐자지 첨바다 저简单记对吧？你举嘛些不当把起来说完的不是？我说嘛那些我什么的家呢？你去这我之内在那呀，真的明白的，
So here, initially, when Lama Tsongkhapa began to communicate with Manjushri, he needed this Lama Umapa Paul Dorje as like a translator. He was unable to communicate directly with Manjushri, and so this human Lama would act as a translator, as an intermediary between Lama Tsongkhapa and Manjushri. But later, Tsongkhapa was able to directly see Manjushri and ask questions back and forth as if he were meeting with a Lama. So he initially relied upon Lama Umapa to translate, but later was able to see Manjushri directly, and seeing Manjushri directly ask him questions and so forth. And so there is a praise to Lama Tsongkhapa by Kedrubje, where he talks about this, saying that you who are able to communicate directly with Manjushri, who are like the essence of the Buddhas of the three times, please bless me and so forth. And so he's referencing the fact that Lama Tsongkhapa was able to directly communicate with Manjushri and answer his questions and so forth.
Oh yeah, that tender was the corner shabagi. Pasare. Oh, let me change it. Tommy, the Daggy and also top the day, turned that day, and I say, Chenny. That the singing would Cheva. Cheva not the Chang singing about a cigarette. The singing would show us not that about a cigarette. Either the singing would show you castle, and the young Shulum the rebuild Lamdo Yang. Our mind and one but Tobai, and then 出去明白推卖讲，白讲多半满足那天呢，讲过来没？春节来段呢，新竹这边300大个县，是个县把他们家在位干了，俺那修路了忙都退化去，俺那平安嘛去，俺那开瓦当。俺那里边人们我忙都掉断把平安完去，在我吃我出去生给了说我的，哦，当。俺那原来出去我们都到把他开完送我的，但是罗先生把那解决了。我原来出去买推卖讲，俺那别做去，什么当把你到不天，当把你天了，俺那别说买不起讲，俺那到把它满就越难的。俺那讲过了没？春节来趟呢，谁个了？最近前边样个春节来趟呢？俺那我打准最近前边样子，听了的呢，其他当把单就不听都送把台，送把台呢，俺那告诉的都讲那么，俺那心里在我上，就告诉你就全部归难烂的，俺那我打个下巴他们下巴个人，现在下巴他们家吧，那些人比下巴他们家的。
So, here, then it continues after saying that through my teacher's kindness, I saw this and my mind found a rest at last. So here, then it quotes from the great sort of essence of eloquence. So this title, Leikshe Ningpo, actually is also part of the title of this poem that we are going through, that is usually quoted as or cited as in praise of dependent origination. But it also has the title Leikshe Ningpo. So here we're talking about the big Leikshe Ningpo, which is the distinguishing that which requires interpretation from those definitive scriptures. And so here it's listed or quoted the pledge, the vow to compose the text. And so here there he's saying basically that although many have tried to understand, they've heard a lot of these texts and so forth, and they've tried to, they sort of tired themselves out trying to understand these. Many people were not able to come to a proper understanding of these texts, although they made a great deal of effort at trying to understand the sort of profound way of these texts. they were unable to do so. And so he continues that due to the kindness of the master, the Lama, I was able to see this. And so from a standpoint of great love, with great love, I will explain this. And so here, it's again referencing the way in which it is due to the kindness of Manjushri and having that direct disciple relationship with Manjushri that Gelama Tsongkhapa was able to fully realize the points of the teachings that were not realized correctly by others. And out of a motivation of loving kindness for others, he's then pledging to explain the meaning of the text.
Oh yeah, that is it. 他希望找了你这把继续出的，他肯定是什么？这把滚了敲，这把滚了送给你，这把敲人天上人，天人引起开完人，天来三界决战去晒的，他等于把的，是吧？三界给这把滚进哪呢？他送给这把的人，是吧？送给这把这个等他看出来，留下了我是团在的，俺送给团，送给确定别个呢，俺看出来，留下团在把这马多，俺送简单的去做的做的人。 我卡是突然就把去没住心，这运动啊，恰个没事了。你就到把线了，别么呢？去年点把找我就是，俺那突然就把去没事些事，就把去做完那些钱呢，就要完嘛的。俺那突然就把去没事，这运动啊，老把给他妈点把那些钱呢，都要完嘛的是。 你就到把线了没？不明白是俺给俺的亲戚女生给到把太大，留下线了怕几钱呢？俺留下线给这个团钱要嘛的是。我那看着这啥呢？朗多金呢7斤毛老把，让给其他的十把拿线线了7斤毛老把，西那个说点把你了跑走，咱们跟那个说咱们他些送这工作，他的这个送75公，我就75这把送节点。 给确诊单呢，俺那都在跟人说两把了，单呢都是他把他谈着了，前边了这个我印章，说这么点的去，再把跟那呢，几张过去出去签注。 出去签入出去，看是，俺就送给起来，他就把这把人是吧？我得看送给这把的开出去的人送了，这把滚了小滚的，这把敲人，先说的3节气这把滚的呢，送给这把敲人了，送给这把敲天啊，天哪那样他，多少给东啊，他们家去咋哇？马上把谁给俺那他看是。 差不多看来是当把电军给他送把电印章，送给这边朝天阳，电军就送把电印比钱呐。俺那叫们的去人路证吧，是大路，我结束上吧给人路证备开完那么的，俺那电军给出送把电了电了，但呢，俺那叫把个这结束成果的，是啊。
Then the next point is how one generates love and compassion for beings, the way in which one produces love and compassion for beings. And this then comes in the next verse, 52, where it says, of all your deeds, your speech is supreme. Within that too, it is this very speech. So the wise should remember the Buddha through this teaching of dependent origination. So here, among all of the deeds of the Buddha, the teachings, the teaching of the Dharma is the Buddha's activity that he does to benefit beings. So among all of the deeds of the Buddha, it is by teaching the Dharma that he is able to liberate others. As the sutra verse says, I'm not able to wash away your negativities with water. It's not like the Buddha can just wash away one's obscurations and negativities with water, nor is the Buddha able to remove sentient beings' sufferings like pulling out a thorn. There's no way that the Buddha can actually just take away their sufferings like pulling out a thorn. Also, the Buddha is unable to transfer his realizations to disciples. There's no way that the Buddha can give his understanding of the mode and the varieties of phenomena to other sentient beings, but rather it is by teaching that the Buddha leads others to liberation. So by showing to others what it is that the Buddha has realized, he is able to benefit them, to lead them to liberation. So among all of the deeds of the Buddha, the teaching of the Dharma is supreme. This is how he goes about liberating other sentient beings. So here, the commentary on this verse, it says that among all of the deeds of the Buddha, the deed of giving the teachings or speaking is supreme. And among that supreme activity of teaching, this very teaching of dependent origination is the kind of supreme teaching. And so here, those who are scholars who have properly given or sort of properly taken hold of this tradition of the victors, they see that this is the best way to remember, to recall the Buddha is on the basis of his having taught dependent origination in this way. So the teachings of the Buddha, the giving of teachings, is the supreme activity of the Buddhas. And among those teachings, then, the most profound, this teaching on dependent origination that is able to remove the root cause of cycling in samsara, this is the supreme kind of teaching. This is what is actually an antidote to the root cause of samsara, and thus benefits sentient beings. So among all of the activities of the Buddha, and among that activity which is supreme, the speech of the Buddha, this teaching of dependent origination is supreme. And so those who are wise should remember the Buddha for this teaching itself.
我也在地家是吧？那最近的白是开始什么的那马上在地界了。对吧？对，最近下年地界了，确定就是下巴就了，在地开始做着什么，就不用3年的算去，是吧？
So then we'll leave here. There are only a few more verses left here of the text, and then there will be a kind of supplementary explanation that comes after, sort of going into more depth into the tenet system. So that's what we'll be going into the next few days.
Oh, yeah.
Idam Guru Amandala Pamniyatayam